and I think that's going to be August Tá. Okay, Gramila August Garda as Chapter initially Kutchaka atop Caharlach and Party, Mr. Michael Leahy, August Karen is with us reached, and Jigil Garda. Michael, this is on Keir, go will
on Keir,
it's very good. Thanks very much for coming in. We've caught up with you.
It's more in the Nordum, sir. I'll do my best. Jeff, remember me on live broadcast, sure.
Well, Michael, let's first, and let me just say, Coharja has ditched us the appointment as Caharlach and Party. You're going to lead us or help lead us through, navigate us through maybe these choppy waters up ahead. So congratulations, Michael, as the new party chairman.
Particularly in the area of common formation, common organisation. I think we are a party with some wonderful ideas and some wonderful people, but we certainly need a higher level of organisation if we're to make any impact. A huge part of politics is not just the ideas, obviously, but being sufficiently organised to be able to deliver a message effectively to people and to be able to present yourself as a credible alternative. So that's a huge job of work to do. It's hopefully I can provide some direction to it, but it really depends on how many people we can get to roll up their sleeves and get stuck in. So let's hope they're there.
Yeah, and Karen, of course, is one of our hardest working members as well. And Karen, it's good to see you join us tonight. But tonight we're going to talk, as it says on the tin, about the excessive woke liberal agenda that's going on across the world and in Ireland as well. Ireland is not immune to this. But we're not going to go into the nuts and bolts of the Chauvin, Floyd case. But I will just mention a little bit about the fallout from it, and the fact that it was the first time there had ever been an American president who had interfered directly in the verdict of a trial in America before the verdict was made known. And we saw this Congressman Waters intervening, putting direct pressure on the jury to come to the right decision, as it was. Like this is unheard of, sort of. And it's just the whole woke agenda. And I put a few links in the description box there of some Black American police officers who are calling this whole thing out and saying this happened very similar on the case of Tony Temper. He was a white guy killed by a black officer. And there were protests for that. They were protesting about the fact that the black police officer was arrested. So it completely flips the situation. It's just woke liberalism gone mad. And of course, we're seeing this in Ireland as well. I had a conversation with some friends the other night. Basically, the white middle class is completely indoctrinated into the woke liberal. And if you say anything to the contrary, if you even suggest that the racism is against whites, you are literally scoffed at and laughed out of the room. So, I mean, you're scoffed at the same way as the Brexit voters are scoffed at. And the white middle class, they seem to be the ones that are in that position all across the UK and in the north. That's what's there at the minute. Michael, do you want to kick us off on that?
I suppose in regard to the Chauvin verdict, it is of note throughout the trial the issue of racism wasn't raised by anybody. The prosecuting attorneys never mentioned racism, and racism didn't appear to have been a feature of it, which is very significant given what had gone before it. You've had America literally burning to the ground, American cities being burnt to the ground on an accusation of racism. But look, America has very serious problems of division. They've been festering for the past 30, 40 years. They've been encouraged for the past 30, 40 years by the left liberal agenda, by the university system, by big money, let's be honest about it. But the problem is that we are now importing the peculiarities of American history and the peculiarities of that for a period of time America had used slaves imported from Africa. And they've got a huge guilty conscience about that, but you have to give them credit. They also abolished slavery. But somehow or other, we in Ireland are now being faced with an accusation that because we're white, that we're part of this history of slavery. And there are people, black immigrants who are coming to Ireland who are saying that we owe them, or there is a certain mentality being encouraged within those people that white people owe them, because if they haven't done very well, it is because of a history of white oppression. But of course, the Irish people were the first slaves of Europe. Irish people were exported as slaves to America earlier, in fact, than African slaves were exported to the New World. Irish slaves were exported to the West Indies. And there was some young chap on a YouTube clip recently complaining that Ireland had a history of slave ownership, that 60 people in Ireland owned slaves. What he doesn't, of course, recognise is that those people were part of a colon-occupying class in Ireland, and that they were not the majority of Irish people. But be that as it may, to try to hold people today responsible for the actions of people several hundred years ago is morally abhorrent. And I think the history of certainly the Irish people has nothing to do with slavery, and the idea that there should be reparations at this remove is really absurd. And it is being used as a means of promoting division between people. And the dreadful thing, when you look at the Kencho shooting there some months ago, it is obviously being used by certain elements of the left to whip up animosity between the races. And it's a very, very dangerous tendency. The assumption that if a black person is shot, they must have been the victim. And you know, the rhetoric of the left immediately to assume that the guards would not have shot him if he'd been a white person. This immediate assumption which is made, it's really very dangerous. And I can see no result to it other than an increase other than the importation of racial tension into Ireland, which has not existed historically. But another interesting example, there was a video going around the YouTube circuit there a couple of months ago as well of a young white chap, a young white teenager, 16 or 17-year-old kid being beaten up and taunted by a black group, which is dreadful. It's a dreadful thing to watch. Now, it wasn't shown, and it shouldn't have been shown. It should have been taken off immediately. Yeah, last year. But RTE, of course, never showed it, and rightly so. But I think if it had been reversed, if it had been a black kid being beaten up by a white gang, RTE would have shown it in a continual loop to try to convince us that we're a racist people. And it's all about the importation of this racist narrative from abroad, which has really nothing to do with our history. But the left wants to promote division. That's what it always has done. I really think the reason that they are so adamant about importing people into this country, even during the time of the housing crisis and the time of mass unemployment thanks to COVID, the reason they're doing that is because they want to promote division. Because the left can only control the society when there is deep division within that society. It's the whole question of divide and conquer. If the people are divided, then they're much more easy to manipulate and to govern.
I see that division thing going on with this Northern Ireland protocol as well. The Cabinet process has been getting on quite well recently. This protocol is causing division and is putting them both against each other. That's another debate. Karen, you want to come in on the woke thing and the follow-on from the Chauvin and what happened last year in Cork and the Dublin shooting?
If you turn your mic on there, Karen. There, you're live.
Right, okay. It was taking too long. Relation to what Michael was saying about the shootings, you know, in January, he's right about, like, you know, it's reverse racism in the sense that they want to cause division. I'm looking at the methods of what the guards use and they have to look at that. Obviously, with the video that you showed me last week, Cathal, the BBC reporter was, you know, taken to task and by the American police officer about calling it as it is. It's not about racism. We have to look at the real issue of how prisoners are dealt with. Yes, there has to be restraint, but it has to be safe restraint. And even with the training of the guards here, they have to protect themselves. And if somebody's coming out with a weapon, they have to give warnings. There's certain things they have to do. There's protocols they have to take. You know, using pepper spray, using guns, and so on. And they have to give warnings to say that this is what they're going to do next if you don't put down your weapon. And that's the real issue. But obviously, with the left coming in and saying, you know, oh, a black man was shot by the Garda, and if this would happen, it was a white man. It doesn't matter. It should never be a racial issue. And we need to kind of look at that and stop what's being used, how the guards conduct themselves. And you're right about the child being shot up, being attacked last week or last year. It would have been shown by RTE because they want to stoke the fire of racism. And this word woke, I was just looking at the word woke and like where it really came from. Woke, that word woke was used by, and it's still used today by Black culture in America, and now it's been used against anyone who's you know, says something that's the opposite to what they believe in. The next thing you know, you're losing your job over any issue, whether it's racism, science, medical, you know, communism and all that kind of thing. But we need to kind of educate people, and as a party, we need to kind of educate people what woke actually means, where it came from, what the media is actually doing to stoke the fire of racism and division. Now, I know Ben Scanlon got into a press conference yesterday, I think it was yesterday, and he asked the question about immigrants, and it put Helen McEntee on the back foot, so to speak, and fair play to him. Media, like, you know, alternative media need to get in there and ask the hard questions.
She never even answered the question.
Yeah, probably
she just
wouldn't.
waffled for 2 minutes.
Sorry?
She just waffled for 2 minutes. She just totally avoided the question. She totally avoided the question. She just waffled for 2 minutes when he asked the question.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah. But I mean, the reason why they want immigrants in here and bringing in 17,000 people. I mean, I was listening to her on the YouTube podcast, and she was saying, like, you know, we need to give them a chance. Well, if somebody comes into our country and they're committing crimes, they need to be told they cannot do this. This is our country, and I wouldn't go to another country and commit a crime there knowingly, to Australia or Canada or the UK or France. None of us would. If we go there, Irish people always went to another country to better themselves and bring something to that country, like a skill or a service. But when people come to our country, yes, they're coming from maybe a bad situation, or maybe it's economically, you know, it's not good, like Africa or whatever, and they're coming to our country, they need to come in and give a skill. They must have a job. Because I remember years ago that you couldn't come in. You couldn't come in until you had a skill. They were looking for skilled people. And in Australia, you have to go to Australia. You must have a job. We're too generous here. But what Helen McEntee and her party want, they want people who will vote for them, because they know the Irish people won't vote for them much longer. And they want people to vote. And that's why they're bringing all this legislation. I know Herman made a comment there during the week. This ramping up of legislation, hate speech laws, and immigration and climate bills and all that, that is happening because they want the foreign vote, because the Irish vote is not much good to them anymore. Oh, sorry, back to yourself.
Yeah, there clearly seems to be an agenda. It can't just be put down to coincidence all the time. It just seems to be so against the Irish people, and this rule that's going on is chipping away at the Irish people in favour of people from elsewhere. And I'm making the point that when the Irish went away to America, Australia, Canada, you don't get a penny from the government. And there was a need for people over there, and they're working their backsides off over there. It's a completely different argument. It's just this media brainwash, I would say. Michael, would you?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a standard enough pattern that you know, when a left-wing government will always try to import immigrants because, you know, immigrants will be dependent and the government can buy their votes. That's basically what they do, and that's one of the reasons that they do it. But you know, just to come back, the 17,000 people are being given an amnesty in one go. Now, that may not seem like a huge number given the context of the overall population of Ireland, but 17,000 people is approximately 1/3 of the number of people that are born in this country in any one year, slightly less than 1/3, about 30%. So in that context, it's a huge number to take at one go. And of course, this is going to be the first of many, many such efforts. It is going to impact. There's a number of things about it. First of all, you're rewarding people who have already broken our laws. I'm not saying these people are criminals. I have no idea. They may be very honest people. They may be in difficult circumstances. But there is an asylum assessment process for that. If they have the skills that we need, let's welcome them with open arms. I have no problem with that. If they are in genuine threat of losing their lives, then I think we should offer them temporary protection until they can go home. But what you're doing is you're legalizing, regularizing the situation of people who have not been found to be in compliance with the asylum process and who have broken our laws. So you're rewarding law breaking. Now, there's one obvious impact of that. The unintended or intended consequence of that is going to be that you're going to attract far more people here. You're also rewarding the employers who have employed these people illegally, very often at very poor wages and very poor living circumstances. So you're rewarding employers who are breaking the law as well. And that's really not a good idea. You're going to create a greater demand for further illegal immigration in Ireland, and there's going to be regular amnesties. This is going to become a regular feature. Every couple of years, you're going to have this massive number of people. We're told it'll be 17,000. We'll see how many it is. It's always more than what the government tells you it will be. And of course, there is this issue that you're importing voters. The normal immigrant voter will be dependent, and they will vote for left-wing parties. So there's no opposition to this. All the parties of our Dáil now see themselves as being left-wing parties. They see themselves as being parties of welfare. They see themselves as being parties of essentially of the left. And the opposition is even more left. Again, by any standards, we have a highly left-wing government. If you look at the Greene agenda that's being implemented now, it's just absolutely extraordinary. It's an extraordinary attack against business, an extraordinary attack against ordinary people. The other thing, the people who are coming in and are being regularized are generally people who are working in low-paid sectors of the economy. They may or may not be skilled people, but they tend to be working in the hospitality sector and so on and so forth. So they're going to make it extremely difficult for Irish people to get jobs in those areas. And it's the lower paid, the weaker members of our society who are being most dramatically affected by it. We have a housing crisis. People cannot get housing, or the level of home ownership in Ireland is dropping very dramatically. It wasn't that long ago that Irish people had the highest level of home ownership. In Europe, we're now just about average and falling very dramatically. And if you take the younger cohort of people in our society, I would suspect that the level of home ownership is probably well below the European average at this stage, because people simply have not been able to buy housing. The government response seems to be to create more public housing and to have everything owned by the state, but Irish people want to own their own houses. It's a mechanism whereby they can develop a certain amount of independence, and that's going to become increasingly difficult if we have a very, very large cohort of people who are being brought in who will need to be housed. And of course, the changes to the direct provision center recently, the direct provision system recently, mean that people are going to be taken off direct provision after 4 months, and they're going to be guaranteed housing. Now, where's that housing going to come from? How is it going to be provided? How is it going to be paid for? There's the old statement that you can either have an open border immigration system, which seems to be what all of our parties want, or you can have a social welfare system. But you can't have both. Because you have both, you're going to be heading for ruin very, very quickly. It simply is not, to use that wonderful Greene term, sustainable, and it can't continue, and it will not continue. It will be brought to a logical conclusion by facts. The extraordinary thing about the left is they seem incapable of facing facts until they bite them in the backside, which they're going to do fairly soon. We have had this extraordinary largesse being distributed to cover the costs of COVID, and that is going to have to be paid back. And the first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a much increased income taxes and much increased property taxes on the people who are prepared to work to pay for the ideologically driven nonsense of our government.
Michael, you say it's going to bite in the ass, and I've asked this question a few times as well. At what point do you think it's going to end? They say enough of this prioritization of people from outside the country. When is it going to bite?
Well, it is. You see, when you don't have a proper political system, when you don't have a proper media, and this is a huge part of it, we do not have proper journalism, we do not have a proper assessment of what is going on. We're a small, very small party, and we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves. Now, the funny thing is, when I talk to people about these ordinary people that I meet, it's extraordinary the number of people who agree with you. But you certainly would not get that impression when you read our newspapers or when you listen to our wonderful commentators. I use that term advisedly. That they're not reflecting the wishes of ordinary people. And we're in a peculiar kind of a culture in that there's two realities. There's the reality presented by the RTE Irish Times nexus, and there's the reality of ordinary people on the ground. Now, what do people vote for? As I've said, we don't have any opposition. We have a radically left-wing government and an even more radically left-wing opposition. And where can people turn unless parties like ours begin to make a serious difference, unless we begin to present ourselves as a credible alternative? This is why we have a really important job to do. There has been no broadly based conservative party in Ireland for decades now at this stage, and the descent into left-wing politics has accelerated to an extraordinary extent over the last, I would say, even 5 to 10 years. We have an obligation to provide people with legitimate alternative. I think if we can do it and present ourselves in a credible fashion, then people will respond. Obviously, we're not going to get media support. We're not going to get publicity. So we have to get out there on the street and let people know that we're here and let people know what our ideas are, because most people that I speak to are appalled at this amnesty. And it's not just they're saying it to me because they know what my position is. There's people who would regularly disagree with me about all kinds of things, people that, I would have been friends with for years before I ever got involved in politics. And yes, they would be in agreement with me. And nobody is representing their views. But there's an extraordinary inertia about politics. So when will it bite? I don't know. I think when the bill comes to be paid for COVID, and if we ever have an inquiry into the complete mismanagement that was carried out in COVID, I think there will be serious anger over it. But of course, we are almost certain never to have an inquiry into that. It would be such a wonderful idea to see what did we get right and what did we get wrong. But I don't see that ever happening. It's just this narrative of fear, this completely negative thinking by the government, and nobody would. I just have a fear that nobody would be held to account for the simple reason that the opposition would have been even worse. So there's nobody to hold the government's feet to the fire. This is what the media should be doing, but of course they're not doing.
Yeah, I'll bring Karen in a wee second. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the COVID thing, I mean, the end of term report is going to have to be on the Irish government. And at the bottom of the World League table on this, the bottom of the table in terms of vaccines and in terms of the worst lockdown in the world is now being referred to in the BBC media, and the American media have written about that. So that's a shocking indictment of Ireland's managing of this. And we saw in Grip Media, it was mentioned today about we're calling now for a referendum on immigration. I mean, that could be a chance, if we push this, that could be a chance to give people who do seem to have a mainstream opinion that they would like to be consulted on this. That could be something where we could gain some traction. Karen, do you want to come in on that news that was released?
Yes, that'd be a great idea. But I'm just thinking about what happened in 2004 when we voted on the anchor baby situation, where it doesn't guarantee a baby or the family Irish citizenship, and now it's coming back to haunt us later. And they're trying to take that away from us for any referendum. And I mean, yes, we definitely need it, and it will give a chance for people to say through the ballot box, we're actually saying to their friends, in the general population, that I do not want large immigration policy and people coming into our country, taking up residence and being only in the country a few months and be given a house. I want to make a point about the size of what's on offer, because recently in Drogheda there was a proposal to build apartments down by the river, but they weren't geared towards families. And houses, when you build houses, they're geared towards families. And the Irish family is also very small. It's like 2 kids, maybe, or 1 kid. And like when you build apartments and only geared towards couples, it doesn't encourage the Irish couple to go and have large families. And that's what we need. And you know, like like Hungarians, they're encouraging people to have large families to build the future for the country. And to me, that, you know, funny enough, was rejected by the council only in the last few weeks. I don't know what the basis was, but to me, when you build only apartments, you only have couples or students living there, and then you don't have families, you know, with 2 or 3 kids, and it's not very permanent. It's not a good way to live, and it only encourages apartment living, and there's no real life, there's no greenery, there's no place to go and play for the kids. So to me, it's not a good family policy. It's better to build houses for Irish families. I want to go back to a point as well that Michael said a while ago about slaves and Irish people being slaves, and entitlement, that when people come over here, they're entitled to certain things. Irish people, we never colonized anywhere, but yet we're told to kind of bring in and welcome people into the country and give them everything that they need. We need to get away from this. We don't owe anybody anything. We're too generous. And the social welfare policy in this country is too generous. We're giving them everything. They get free everything. They get a large payout. And we need to change that as well. You want to be able to support a family or person who's unemployed for a while, but don't encourage generational unemployment at the same time. So we need to kind of, when they're out of work, train them in a new job, give them the money they need for as long as they need it, but then make sure they go back to work. If somebody's coming into the country, only make sure they get a job as soon as possible. The issue also with the houses, giving a house to somebody after a few months, that's not on us either. And you're right as well. We've no money. Where do we get the money for that? And there's not much construction going on. So to me, it's not going to work. The whole plan is not going to work. So over to yourself there.
Yeah.
Could I just come in on you had some interesting points there, Karen, about the apartment type dwellings. I did some PhD research on this. I'm quite an interest in housing, and a planner and an architect by profession. But the whole impact that the very strong push by government over the past 15 years for higher density. I mean, that's what we hear about all the time: increase the density, move upwards, high-rise buildings, so on and so forth. And I did some research on it in regard to the southern Dublin area and the central Dublin area and so on and so forth. And I made some very interesting findings that the birth rate in those areas which were predominantly high density, high rise, was far, far less than it was in the suburban areas. And there was a peculiar dichotomy as well, that it seemed to affect the category of people called the white Irish in the census, rather than other people. The East Europeans, it didn't have quite the same effect. That in an equivalent situation where apartments were predominantly owned or occupied by, say, East Europeans or whatever, that the birth rate was higher than it was for Irish people. And then for Irish people, high-rise, high-density, as opposed to suburban housing, the birth rate was significantly impacted as well. So it has often been used as a justification for promoting high-rise and high-density. Well, the birth rate is falling. People are having smaller families, so it's adequate to provide apartments for them. But the reality is, if there's only apartments available to people, they won't be able to have larger families. And it is frequently cited as one of the reasons why people have not had larger families, because they don't have space, they only have apartments. And in Ireland in particular, changing house is a big traumatic, difficult. There's a big transfer expense, there's stamp duty, there's solicitors' fees, there's time. If you don't hit the market at the right time, you won't be able to change your house. So it's not easy just to buy an apartment as a starter home and then assume that when you want to have an extra kid, you can make that move very quickly. It depends on how the market is going. It depends on what's available for you, and you simply may not be able to move. So you'll defer and defer and defer having that second kid, and then it doesn't happen. I mean, you can't plan these things as much as you'd like to. So it undoubtedly has an effect on the birth rate in Ireland. And of course, the birth rate in Ireland, even with all the immigrants that we brought in, the birth rate is catastrophically low. It's at 1.8 persons. When I go back, when I was studying, when I started studying planning, the birth rate in Ireland was one of the highest in Europe. It was, I think it was over 3. children per woman, and well above replacement level. Replacement level is about 2.2 children per average woman. That's if you're at that level, then you replace your population without any difficulty. We're at about 1.8. If it goes to about 1.7, 1.6, 1.5, it becomes catastrophic. You hit a tipping point and your population goes into freefall. Now, if you ask anecdotally any medical doctor working in a maternity hospital in Ireland who are having the children, it's generally foreigners, it's generally people from outside Ireland, while the average birth rate in Ireland may be 1.8 at the moment, which is well below replacement level. The reality is that for the native Irish people, it's almost certainly far less than that. So it's very difficult to get accurate statistics and figures on that, and you're just working anecdotally, but that the East Europeans, immigrant people will generally have higher birth rates. That's a standard characteristic as well. When people immigrate to another country, they tend to bring their mores with them, and they tend to have a greater reliance on more children for the future. They're a somewhat less settled fashion. It just tends to be a tendency. So many demographers believe that by 2050, the native Irish will probably be in a minority in this country. If Helen McEntee and Simon Coveney, Leah Radker and co get their way, it will, I think, happen a lot more quickly than that. Like the COVID situation, we don't have accurate figures. We don't really know how many people are here illegally. There's a suggestion that approximately 17% of the people in the Republic are from outside of the Republic. But you hear other statistics, or you hear other figures that from the census numerators, that they haven't been able to get accurate figures for the central Dublin area, for the number of people who are living in apartments and so on and so forth. And there are other indicators that the number of people who are here illegally, who are not accounted for in the system, may be very considerably larger than we think. So it is a very rapid replacement for a country which didn't experience in migration historically in the past. It has all happened very, very quickly in the space of certainly no more than 20 years that we are seeing a very significant demographic change. Now, we may be the first country in all of history to have a significant population change without it resulting in violence and violent affray and social disruption. But I doubt it. I doubt it. If you're in a situation where the native population is suddenly in a minority, that is going to lead to tension. It's going to lead to disruption. And unfortunately, it may lead to civil strife and violence. And of course, we are one of the very early exemplars of this, because this is what happened in our plantations, that when our people were replaced, it resulted in several hundred years of strife, which has been going on in this country now for 400 years, and seemed it may be abating, but it may be flaring up again. So of all people, we should be very, very wary of the process of rapidly introducing people from outside, unless we have a very, very good means of integrating them. And nobody's interested in that. The left do not want to integrate people from abroad. They want to ensure that there's division between them, and they want to ensure if there's any chance of stirring up racial hatred, they will take it, and they will use that as an opportunity to promote division in society and to profit politically from it.
Yeah, somebody put a post up there saying it's a plantation, and I said it's going to be a worse plantation than the last one. Mm-hmm. And you're bringing in cultures that are absolutely not similar at all to the indigenous culture, where at least, the cultures in the north are quite similar. They're very similar. They're very culturally aligned, Christian, and with the problems that there has, and maybe kick it off as you alluded to. But there's another thing that's come up in the news this week. There's an opportunity, albeit small, in an election, a by-election, coming in Dublin Bay South, which is quite a middle-class constituency. I read somewhere there that the choice is between one group of parties that believes in mass immigration, mass abortion, heavy lockdown and pro-EU, and another group of parties that believes in mass abortion, mass immigration, pro-lockdown and pro-EU. So there's an opportunity for maybe somebody like us to step in there. Now, it's not going to be easy. I think that somebody mentioned a couple of people whose names are kicking in. I think we have to maybe show our hand and get involved in that.
Sorry, my mic was off there. Absolutely, Cathal, we must get involved in it. There's no doubt there is a huge political vacuum there. As I pointed out several times, there is no choice. I mean, there's no choice. There's no difference as far as I'm concerned between Sinn Féin and Fine Gael. There's very, very, very marginal difference at the perimeter, but very, very little. Fianna Fáil have now moved into the usual anti-Catholic space, to an extraordinary extent, even though they still managed to garner a traditional Catholic vote. I cannot understand why, because they're as anti-Catholic as any of the rest of them. So there's no doubt whatsoever that there is a massive gap there in the market. I mentioned earlier about the dual reality that we live under. That there's a reality of people on the ground, and there's a reality as it's presented in our media and our social media and our newspapers. It's a question of, what do people base their votes on? Do they still believe the garbage that is published in newspapers like the Irish Times, or the nonsense that is emanated from our journalists and radio television sharing? I think most people know. They know from their own experience. This is a small country, and whenever RTE reports on anything that you're familiar with, it's always wrong. Always. Nothing at all to do with what we talk about social justice or anything like that. If they report on anything to do with architecture or planning, which areas where I have an expertise, it is always wrong. If they report in your local area, it's always wrong. They simply cannot get a straight story right. And then they start putting a spin on things, of course, when we talk about immigration or anything like that. You're not getting the true story. Perhaps people are waking up to that. I don't know. I've heard suggestions that the whole COVID narrative is a matter of mass psychosis, that people are being driven into a narrative of fear. They're not able to think rationally, and that when they're in that position of fear, they're not going to vote in their own interests. Maybe that's what's going to happen. I don't know, but one way or the other, I think our purpose in being in politics is to give people an opportunity to vote for something that we believe in. I believe that our policies are very, very sensible. Most people that I speak to would absolutely agree with the great majority of our policies. They certainly wouldn't regard us as being far anything, let alone far right. When you see the guards going to break up masses and to hunt elderly ladies saying the rosary away, where's the extremism? It's certainly not the old ladies who are trying to say a few prayers at mass. It is in the politicians who would use an Garda Síochána for that purpose. These are very, very sad and very tragic events in our country, and as patriotic people, we have to bring that to people's attention and try to offer them a genuine alternative while we still can. Whether, by the time that by-election comes around, of course, we'll have the hate speech laws, and we know how they're going to be used. They're going to be used to quieten political dissension, to quieten debate. Even having a discussion about immigration may result in us being imprisoned or fined. That is the reality. If you mention immigration, it would be assumed that you're coming at it from a racist perspective and that you're trying to promote hate, which of course is completely false. So not a very pleasant series of prospects. But we have to be out there. We have to try to save our country. That's why we're involved in politics. If we continue to go down the horrible road we're going down, I really dread to think where it's going to end up. It won't be pleasant.
But Michael, you mentioned there that we're extremists. I mean, we are absolutely not extremists at all. Our views, as you say, are very moderate. I watched your video last week. We called for a moderate lockdown measures, not an extreme measures. We call for sensible immigration, and even on the immigration point, illegal immigration is harming those that came in legally. So we're actually speaking up for those that came in legally. So our measures, our policies are very well thought out, very moderate, very sensible. Karen, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, hi. In relation to the issues, I mean, yes, they're all reasonable. I mean, we are always attacked about the immigration issue, but when people actually read the policy of reasonable, controlled immigration, they soon kind of get it. It's just that initially, when you mention immigration, it's like a hotbed of, initially to think about racism when it's actually not. relation to other, I mean, standing in the South Bay, I mean, I helped out last year with a previous candidate. I know it's an area that could be difficult, but certain areas like Ranelagh, Mines, Irishtown, they're areas that were doing quite well for that candidate. And the issue of worship, which wasn't an issue last year, obviously, those issues are very important to people like that. They want to go to Mass. And they'll probably discuss that the Catholic Church isn't coming out and saying, you know, we're going to open our doors. So they probably want a party coming out and saying, we respect and worship the freedom to worship in your church anytime you want. That would hit home. You know, it'd have to, because a lot of people will go to Mass in those areas like, you know, Cherringer or Rathgar and places like that. And it is very important to people. I think if we have very good policies, you know, have our dash, have a good policy, a strong candidate, we could do quite well and displace the votes of other people who are winning, like, you know, like Sinn Féin, the left, Fine Gael, and so on, because they're not going to be expect us to run. They probably expect us to be not running this race at all, and we have to have a candidate in there. And also, but would probably draw new members to us as well, because people will see, oh, they are active. We are actually, you know, coming out, saying what we're saying. We're in every race, every election, and we're coming out, and we're not shy to say what our policies are. We're not shying away from the difficult issues. So it's a matter of picking the person who will stand in the election and show our hand. It's very important. I know it's wasn't expected. But last year we ran 11 candidates on a very short time, and we done quite well despite everything. And I think it's more of, we have time on our hands now to get prepared. So over to yourself there.
Michael, we chatted earlier. Jackie Gilmore, is that the Renew guy down there, or is he the one that's somebody's mentioned it in the chat there?
Mm-hmm.
Is he, right. Well, I suppose that you're saying he might run, but I still think she, right. I still think we should definitely get ourselves out there. I mean, it's a time for it's a chance for us to put our money where our mouth has been, and it's a chance for those lockdown critics to get out there and vote and put their X on the ballot paper and their number one and whatever. It's a chance for it's going to be publicity one way or the other, and
no, absolutely, we have to do it. I know we probably will be winding up pretty soon. Just one other point I want to make about this whole process that we're going through at the moment, and it is that our rights have been attacked. Everybody accepts that. Our rights of freedom of worship, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and most importantly, our right to protest. Now, the government is doing this on the basis of what they've referred to as the common good, but they haven't justified their position. It's not justifiable. It is given the lie by virtue of the fact that countries which have not been in lockdown have not fared any better or any worse than we have. And as you pointed out, it's one of the least successful vaccine rollouts of any of the countries. But at the same time as the right to protest has effectively been prohibited, the government is in the throes of introducing a raft of very, very transformative and radical legislation, including attacking freedom of speech, including importation of a large number of immigrants, amnesties for immigrants, and the climate change bill. These are radical, transformative pieces of legislation. Now, can the government argue that they have a right to trample over our rights in the Constitution by virtue of the fact that they have a democratic mandate, while at the same time they have prohibited protest? Because the essential part of any democratic structure is the right of the people to protest and to make their dissension felt. If peaceful legislation is proposed and there's widespread public concern about it and widespread protest about it, generally the government will listen to that. But in a situation where protest is not possible, how can that debate be carried out properly? And can they legitimately state that they have a democratic right to do anything while protest is prohibited? Because you have to have free expression, you have to have free protest if you have a legitimate democracy. Now, if they want to make the argument that they must do this for public health, then they must stop introducing highly radical, highly transformative and highly destructive legislation. You can either have it one way or the other. You can suspend democracy, which is what they've done. But if you suspend democracy, you cannot engage in the process of a radical series of legislative provisions which are completely transforming the country. And that's what they're doing. They're getting it both ways. And I think a large part of the reason that they're introducing the very, very radical legislative proposals they are is because they know we don't have the right to protest. If we go out to protest, we'll be arrested by the guards and told that we're in breach of public health regulations, which, of course, as we all know, is complete nonsense. Complete and total nonsense. The other thing is that our courts have not exactly behaved very well in this. They have not treated these matters with the urgency with which they're required. Waters and O'Doherty, Ganley, these people have all taken, Tracy O'Mahony now, they're all going through the courts, and it's like it's going at a snail's pace. It is urgent that our rights be determined. The government have got to establish they have a right to do this, that they have a sufficient justification to do this. I believe that if they went into a properly constituted court and tried to justify what they're doing, they'd be kicked out because they won't be able to justify what they're doing. And while they're doing this, they have suspended our democracy, and at the same time, they're introducing a horribly radical, transformative legislative agenda. It doesn't work. It's going to end in tears. This is going to be dreadful, and we have to stop them. Your mic is off, Colin, right?
Yeah. A lot of good feedback there coming through on that, Michael. Very good points been made. If we get this point to get our cohesive message out there, we have to be realistic. You know, it's a chance to build for the future anyway. You know, this is going to be a referendum on how the country has done in terms of this lockdown. Some people are even suggesting Fine Gael have maybe done quite well in terms of the vaccine rollout, but how they can make that up, I do not know. But it's definitely an opportunity for us to get noticed and take forward one and to show people that we are here. Karen, have you anything you want to that?
Yes, well, basically, I mean, I agree with what Michael was saying. Today I watched a exchange between Micéal Martin and Mattie McGrath, and Mattie McGrath made a point of where Ireland has gone back to Nazi days, and of course, Micéal Martin wasn't happy with that and asked him to retract, and Mattie McGrath refused. Now, we need more TDs and the likes of us saying that to stand up to the bullying in the Dole and the bullying, you know, from the guards. I mean, we don't want to be anti-guards, but the guards need to stand up themselves. They all come under the same commissioner, and what happened last Sunday was an absolute disgrace. Having 2 guards going in and stopping a mass, and people walking out. Only one person had the guts to stand up to the guards, but he had to leave as well. Now, I really do think we have a good chance of making an impact in this election, and just be prepared and be strong on our policies and be media savvy and so on. Because once we hit the streets with leaflets and canvassing for this person, we can make a big difference. There's no doubt. There'll be people there probably looking at us and want to help us, and who are not in the party, and they'll be looking for someone like us to stand up. So I have a good chance of making an impact. So, yeah, definitely.
As you said, Michael, it's an urban constituency, so the legwork won't be that bad. So if we got a team down there on the streets, is it Ranelagh? Yeah. I know Ranelagh very well. It's Ranelagh and Rathmines? Is that sort of area? I mean, we could get out there and start sort of hitting, chatting to people, and it's very middle class. But I mean, people around there, it's not going to be too antagonistic, but. You know, so it's a
widespread constituency. The Irish town is there's significant working class areas there as well. You know, it's certainly not all middle class. There's quite a few demographics there. You know, and quite a transient population, good big student population as well. You know, so it's a good microcosm. There's a wide variety of people there. You know, you do pick up a lot of votes from various different sectors.
Yeah. And as Karen says about that clip last week with in the church, when the guard coming in, I mean, that was absolutely shocking, and that's been hopefully seen around the world, and I shared it, and hopefully a lot of people saw that, of what is actually going on in Ireland. And they're not tackling mosques, and they weren't tackling that congregation in Salt Hill So the tackling, as you said, Michael, some old parishioners in the church. Is this how Ireland has fallen?
It's very sad. I mean, there was a time, we have lost the sense of the sacred. The church is a sacred space. We have absolutely no sense of that anymore. Did they have a warrant to enter a church? You're entering somebody's property. Can you enter somebody's property without a warrant? Perhaps you can, but you certainly should not. They may have the power, but they don't have the right to do so. And I think again, our courts have so often let us down. They have not protected our rights to the extent that they should, particularly over the past 20 years. There's a lot of legislation that's gone through, which in my opinion is very, very dubious. It'd be interesting to see if they required a warrant to enter a private property, which is what a church is. It's owned by a church. Do they have a right to enter it? I doubt it. I very much doubt it, but I don't think you're going to get too many priests who would kick them out. There's a few courageous priests there, but I'm afraid the role of our church leaders is they haven't exactly covered themselves in glory either. I think when the very first thing that they did was to close churches down, even before the government asked them to do so. The very first thing they did was to turn their back on the sacraments. You really have to wonder about their level of belief and what they actually stand for. It'll be very interesting to see how many people go back to the churches after this is all over, because I think nobody is.
It's all part of just pandering to the left.
I don't know. I think it's a lack of courage on the part of the church leadership as well. There's no doubt about that. I think the church does like to see itself as being quiescent with the state. That's a big mistake. If the church is not countercultural, it's nothing. Now they have made some noises, but not nearly to the extent that they should. I think even at this stage, if the church provided some leadership, I think that we get a great deal of support from the people. I think even if they were even at this late stage, if they were to say, look, we're opening our churches, you can arrest us all if you want, but this is far too important for us to ignore it, and they should do that, and they would get support.
I mean, Karen, you wrote letters to your local church, didn't you, during the week?
Well, a post went out on Sunday, seemingly a priest, an American priest, who was given confession, was told to stop. And somebody put up his details, like, email and phone number to show support, because he wasn't getting any support from the people above him, archbishops and so on. So I sent an email as well, because I think they need to hear from all over the country that there's people watching, listening, and supporting their efforts, the ones that are stepping up. I mean, what happened last Sunday was where a priest was going to say Mass, Latin Mass, and he was intimidated by 2 guards, and then you have another one saying confession. That's a very private affair between the priest and the confessor. So if I went to confession, that's something that's between me and him, and that would be the end of it. And I wouldn't want a Garda coming along and stopping the priest, stopping my confession. It's none of their business. And when you look at the pastor over in Canada, I don't know if you're aware of this man or not, he's very good. He's Polish by origin, Arthur Palowski, and he has his own church in Alberta, Calgary in Canada. And twice, once before Easter and once recently, he's been visited by the police. The second time was a SWAT team to go to his church to intimidate the people who are attending his church. Now he's stepping up the ante. He'd have no problem getting arrested if it came to that. But because he's Polish, he can see the communism long before most people would. And I've been thinking about this quite a while, as a party. I mean, people like ourselves can see and use communism quite freely because we understand what it means, and what we're seeing is communism. But the general public who are not seeing it wouldn't use the word communism, and they might not see it as communism. And I'm just wondering if we've done something to educate what communism really is, because I know we spoke about this before. We have members who are coming from Eastern Europe. We need to kind of maybe bring them together and say, well, listen, we need to come some kind of campaign that's easy for people to understand that what's really going on in the background is bringing in communism through now at this stage to the front door, not the back door anymore. I mean, the legislation that's coming down the tracks is it's like a speed train. It's like a speed train.
I think we do have a few Polish members in County Clare, and they know they've seen it before, and they have a very recent memory of it. And these would be people that'd be of an age when they wouldn't have a direct memory of communism, but their parents would certainly have a memory of communism. They know what's coming. The blather, the nonsense, the lies, the propaganda that we get every single day, and the nonsensical statistics that have been shoved down our throat every day. It's just a narrative of fear and a narrative of deception. And they know it's lies. We don't. There are still people who believe the garbage that they read in the newspapers, and the garbage that comes out of radio, television, sharing, and that's the problem. We have to get beyond that. But I think it may be coming to an end. Maybe people are getting wise to it. I sincerely hope they are, anyway, because if they don't, we're in big trouble. So we got to get out there.
Yeah, I kind of jokingly make the point, you talk about Ireland, the north and the south. It's like the border there. It's a bit like the old Germany. I think down south is very like East Germany, and the north more like freer kind of West Germany. The level of communism, the level of backwardness I see down south is just scary. It's shocking. And we need to start putting that right. But look, guys, Akarja, that was a great debate tonight. We got a lot of great feedback, a lot of people chipping in there, and that was very good. And now 6 months we've got to build for this election. Now we're probably not going to win it, but we can certainly try and make a splash. And if we develop a lot of resources to that, I think we'll get our name out there. Okay, unless anybody else has anything else they want to chip in, any burning points, we'll maybe wrap it up there.
No, how good a call. Good debate.
Michael. Okay. Karen.
Slán agad.
Slán. And thanks for all our guests coming in.
Okay.
And we'll see you next time. Good Jane Keir, Ella. Slán.
Bye.